Hey, welcome to Crime Time 911. In 1984, 9-year-old Christine Jessop disappeared from her home in Queensville, Ontario. 3 months later, her body was found in a rural area miles away. She had been brutally unalived. The investigation that followed would become one of Canada's most infamous cases, leading to a wrongful conviction, decades of unanswered questions, and a family left searching for justice. For years, the truth seemed out of reach, but nearly 4 decades later, a DNA breakthrough revealed the name of the man who had slipped through the cracks all along. This is the story of Christine Jessop, the crime, the wrongful conviction, and the long-awaited answer. Janet and Bob Jessop were told they couldn't have children. After adopting their son Kenneth, they unexpectedly became pregnant and welcomed Christine into their family. They lived in rural Queensville, Ontario, an hour north of Toronto, where doors stayed unlocked and kids played freely. Financial difficulties forced the Jessops out of their home, and then they had to live on a boat for a little while. Christine was described as small but spunky, full of energy, and always insisted on pitching whenever she played baseball. On October 3, 1984, Janet decided she would go visit her husband, who had been put in prison for stealing money from his mentally challenged uncle. When Christine found out that her mom was going to see her dad, she wanted to go. However, Janet felt that Christine was too young to go to the Toronto prison. Janet sent Christine off to school and took her son Ken with her to go visit Bob. So I can totally understand where Janet was coming from. I'm not sure that I would want to take my 9-year-old into a prison of any sort, no matter who it was to go visit. It seems like that's a pretty scary experience for such a young child. After school, Christine was dropped off at her home by the school bus. This is when she grabbed her bike and went to a nearby store. Later, when Janet and Ken returned at about 4:10 p.m., they found Christine's bicycle laying in the middle of the garage. This was strange to them because Christine always leaned her bike up against the freezer. When they entered the home, they saw Christine's backpack on the table, and the mail had been brought inside, but no sign of Christine. Janet called friends, searched the park and cornfields, and alerted police when nothing turned up. Neighbors and family even checked a local mushroom farm without success. Eventually, this tiny town was alive with helicopters, police with search dogs, the media, as well as many others out searching for Christine. But there was still no signs of her. I'm sure at this point Janet was kicking herself for not taking Christine with her when she went to visit her husband in prison, or at the very least arranging for a babysitter to watch her after school. If I were in her shoes, I would have so many what-ifs racing around my head. I'm sure she had, or maybe still does, blame herself for leaving Christine home alone that day. On October 6th, Bob was granted a release from prison on humanitarian grounds. So a release from prison on humanitarian grounds, also known as compassionate release or humanitarian parole, is an early release granted in extraordinary, compelling, or difficult circumstances such as terminal illness, undue hardship, or the inability to receive critical medical treatment within prison. So in this case, Bob was released because his daughter was missing. On December 31st, 1984, Fred Patterson and his young daughters found a child's body near Sunderland. Dental records confirmed it was Christine. An autopsy showed she had been SA'd. A local woman, Lydia, told the media she'd heard screams for help the night Christine vanished. Lydia stated that she had contacted the police, but they had dismissed the screams as coming from the town drunk. This is so eerie to me. Hearing screams for help would send chills up my spine. It's too bad that the police hadn't taken Lydia's report seriously. If they had just taken the time to look around the area, perhaps Christine could have been saved. Christine's funeral took place on January 7th, 1985. Kenneth felt that not all of his sister's remains had been recovered. He said he couldn't explain how he knew, it was just a feeling he had. The Jessops informed the police of this concern, but they were told that the police had done a thorough investigation of the site and that all of Christine's remains had been collected. Janet and Bob wanted to put their son at ease, so they took him to the site where Christine's remains had been found. When the family returned to the discovery site, they discovered that the site was littered with coffee cups and garbage. The family had searched for an hour, and just when they turned to leave, Kenneth discovered a pile of bones on the ground in front of him. They picked up one of the discarded coffee cups and put the bones inside and went straight to the Sunderland Police Department. Bob asked the detective if they were sure that they had collected all of his daughter's remains from the discovery site. He was once again told that yes, they did in fact collect all of Christine's remains. This is when Bob slammed the coffee cup full of bones on the counter and asked, "What are these?" Another officer suggested that they were the bones of an animal. The bones in question were sent for testing, and it was confirmed that they were, in fact, the remains of Christine. I really would have loved to see the look on the detectives' faces when they learned that they missed those bones. I couldn't even imagine how angry Christine's family would have been as well, because to me, it would be pretty clear that the discovery site wasn't searched or investigated thoroughly enough. What else had the police missed? Christine's family was certain that she would never go anywhere with a stranger and that she had to have known the person who took her. This is when the police focused on neighbors and people that the family knew. Guy Paul Morin, then 25, lived next door and was familiar to Christine. Janet often asked Guy's mother to watch Christine when she ran out. On April 22, 1985, police searched the Morin home and arrested him. There had apparently been evidence found on Christine's clothing that linked Morin to her disappearance. Morin had not been a part of any searches for Christine either. He was also suspected in 2 other unalivings. So many perpetrators like to go on the searches for their victims. They love to insert themselves deep into the investigation and get a sick satisfaction from being so involved with those who are mourning the loss of their loved ones. I understand how Guy not participating in the searches for Christine is suspicious, but to me it's also not suspicious, if that makes any sense. Morin's first trial ended in acquittal on February 7, 1986. The Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the trial judge had made fundamental errors, and as a result, there would be another trial. The Crown attorneys hid the fact that Kenneth and his family had found additional bones at the site where Christine's remains had been found from the defense. In turn, the defense wanted to exhume Christine's remains. The police and the Crown wanted the Jessop family to get a lawyer and fight the exhumation, not because they wanted to respect Christine, but because they wanted to cover up their mistakes. The family was advised not to tell anyone about the exhumation, so Kenneth decided to contact City TV and let them know all about it. A second autopsy revealed over 200 sharp object wounds, dislocated hips, a broken nose, and defensive wounds. Evidence Christine was alive during her attack. The second trial for Morin began November 13, 1991. It was said that the defense was going to state that Christine went willingly with her assailant and would consent to the essay. If this is true, what in the actual fuck? Seriously, this really makes me angry. How can a child consent to anything inappropriate and it be okay? To try to prevent your client from going to jail, and this is your defense? Like, seriously, that they're basically saying that it's okay that she was brutally attacked, essayed, and unalived because she consented to it. These people are so messed up. Kenneth would take the stand in the second trial and made a shocking confession. He revealed he'd been essayed from the ages of 7 to 12 by 2 neighborhood boys who were aged 15 and 18 at the time. Kenneth was an easy target for these chomos because he was being bullied in school and was lonely. This allowed these teens to easily insert themselves into his life as his only friends. At one point, these horrific boys would bring Christine into the abuse, forcing Kenneth to simulate certain positions for his abuser's sick and twisted pleasure. However, when the 15-year-old wasn't getting the satisfaction he wanted, they decided not to include Christine anymore. The media would take this traumatic story and twist it into accusations against Kenneth. They started to report that Kenneth was the one who took his own sister's life after he essayed her. They claimed that he had abused her for 5 years. After many people contacted the media and called them out on their false accusations, They tried to redact what they had already put out into the public, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Kenneth had attempted to end it all as a result of the media's carelessness and disregard for all the humans involved. All they wanted was a juicy story. On July 23, 1992, after 12 days of deliberations, a jury found Morin guilty and sentenced him to life. He appealed on August 22nd and was granted bail while he waited for the results of the appeal. In 1994, emerging DNA techniques proved Morin could not have committed the crime, and he was exonerated. On June 22, 1996, the Kaufman Inquiry was created to look into why, after nearly 2 decades, there had been no findings in the Christine Jessop case. They would find that there had been a lot of serious deficiencies in the way that the evidence had been collected and how the case was investigated. There was no grid search done in the area. Hence, this is why some of Christine's bones had been missed. On the night that Christine's remains had been found, a storm had been coming and the police knew it. So instead of properly preserving the scene, they just threw tarps over her body. After the storm had passed, the police had used hair dryers to melt the ice off the body, as well as instead of using proper tools required for investigating a body and a crime scene, they used gardening tools. There were so many more things found that were completely unprofessional when it came to a crime scene investigation. The police also did not block off the scene, allowing anyone to walk right through it if they wished. Once the police had Morin in their sight, they ignored the possibility of anyone else being a potential suspect. They got tunnel vision and focused everything they had on ensuring Morin was convicted. Kenneth revealed at the inquiry that investigators would pressure him and his mother to change their timelines to ensure that it fit with Morin's timelines. The jailhouse informants whose statements were used to convict Morin were also determined to be completely unreliable. When police were called out on their misconduct, they would point fingers at Janet, claiming she was the one responsible for making Morin a suspect. Of course, the police couldn't just admit that they were in the wrong and conducted a less than satisfactory investigation. They had to point fingers at innocent people. Even if Janet had blatantly said, Guy Morin took my daughter, it's still the police's job to determine whether or not this is true. But instead, they took the lazy way out and just decided that Morin looked like a good suspect and did nothing else to rule him or anyone else out. The 1,400-page report detailed police misconduct, coarse timeline, and unreliable jailhouse informants. The inquiry concluded December 19, 1997, and no one made any attempts to reinvestigate Christine's case. The Christine Jessop case was the first Canadian case to have investigative genetic genealogy, or IgG, applied to it to determine who the suspect was. This process narrowed the pool of suspects down to 2 brothers. However, when they finally determined who their suspect was, they found out that he had unalived himself 5 years prior. There had been an autopsy conducted to determine how this person had taken his own life, and during this time his blood had been collected. It was then tested to determine whether or not he committed the horrific act on Christine. When the results came back, the case would finally be solved. On October 15, 2020, a press conference was held to announce that they had finally found Christine's attacker. His name was Calvin Hoover. Hoover was 28 years old at the time he took Christine and had been known to the Jessop family. Hoover had worked for Bob Jessop, and his wife, Heather, had been Bob's secretary. The Jessops had Hoover and his wife over to their home on different occasions for barbecues. Heather Hoover knew that Janet and Ken were going to visit Bob in jail on that fateful day because Janet had called Heather to let her know. This is how Hoover had known that Christine would be home alone after school that day, and that this was his opportunity to take Christine and act upon his disgusting fantasies. It's speculated that Hoover had convinced Christine to go with him by telling her that he was going to take her to the prison to see her father. The Hoovers had a cabin that was only 6 kilometers away from where Christine had been located in 1984. 36 years after her disappearance, the case was finally solved, thanks to the investigators of her cold case and the newest technology in IgG. I still can't believe what the Jessop family had gone through. As if losing their child or sister wasn't enough, they had to go through police basically telling them to lie, false accusations, and so much more. I believe that if the police had done their jobs properly, Hoover would have been found and would be spending the rest of his life rotting in a cell. Share your thoughts on this case in the comments below. Don't forget to follow, like, and share this episode. It helps more people discover these stories and keeps the conversation going. Thanks for listening to Crime Time 911. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember to always trust your gut.